She lived behind rusted metal sheets in a squatter's camp, slept on cardboard, and earned her meals by fixing broken engines with her bare hands. He commanded an empire built on fear, wore custom suits that cost more than her entire neighborhood, and could end a life with a single phone call. But when his bulletproof luxury sedan died on Ghost Road, the most dangerous street in the city, she stepped out of the shadows and did something that would shatter the wall he'd built around his heart. How did one fearless act from a girl with oil-stained hands and a genius mind force a mafia boss to confront the boy he used to be? Stay with me, because this story will show you that sometimes the bravest souls survive in the most brutal places. This is the story of how Brittany Adams helped a man the world called a monster and discovered that her missing best friend had been hiding in plain sight all along. It was a suffocating Tuesday night in the industrial district, the kind of night where the fog rolled in thick from the harbor and turned the streetlights into ghostly halos. The air smelled of diesel fumes and rust. But on Ghost Road, the stretch of cracked asphalt that even cops refused to patrol after dark, everything was silent, unnaturally silent. A black Maserati Quattroporte cut through the darkness, its engine growling like a caged predator. Inside, a man named Tae-hyun Lee sat rigid behind the wheel, his tattooed hands gripping the leather steering wheel. At 32, he had already built the most feared criminal empire in the region. The Iron Dragon Syndicate controlled everything: smuggling routes, protection rackets, underground gambling. People whispered his name in terror. Rival gangs crossed the street when his motorcade passed. Police captains took his calls at midnight. But tonight, Tae-hyun was alone. No bodyguards, no convoy. Just him and the ghosts of decisions he could never undo. He was heading back to his fortress compound after a meeting that had ended in blood and broken promises. All he wanted was to get behind his 12-foot walls, pour himself 3 fingers of whiskey, and try to forget the look in that man's eyes before the trigger was pulled. Then, without warning, the Maserati shuddered. The engine coughed once, twice, and died. The dashboard went dark. The purr became silence. Tae-hyun coasted to a stop in the middle of Ghost Road, surrounded by abandoned warehouses and the skeletal frames of burned-out cars. His jaw clenched. His hand moved instinctively to the Glock beneath his jacket. And that's when he saw her. A figure emerging from the fog, walking toward his dead car with a worn toolbox in her hands and absolutely no fear in her eyes. Before we continue, take a second to subscribe and tell me in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is over there. I love knowing where these stories travel. The first thing Tae-hyun noticed was the toolbox. Old, battered metal with rust bleeding through faded red paint. The second thing was her hands, small, but scarred and calloused in a way that spoke of years, not months of hard labor. She walked right up to his driver's side window and knocked twice, sharp and businesslike, as if she knocked on the windows of mafia bosses every Tuesday night. Tae-hyun's finger twitched on the Glock's grip. Nobody approached him like this. Nobody with any survival instinct, anyway. "Pop the hood," she said. Her voice was clear, calm, completely unbothered by the fact that she was standing in the most dangerous quarter-mile in the city, talking to a man whose car probably cost more than she'd see in a lifetime. He studied her through the tinted window. She couldn't have been more than 25, dressed in oil-stained cargo pants and a tank top that had seen better years. Her dark hair was pulled back in a messy ponytail, and there was a smudge of grease already on her left cheek, as if she'd been elbow-deep in an engine before deciding to wander into a potential execution. "You deaf?" she asked, meeting his eyes through the glass without flinching. "Pop the hood or sit here till morning. Your choice." Something about her tone, impatient, almost annoyed, made him comply. He pulled the release lever. The hood clicked open with a hiss of trapped heat. She disappeared around the front of the car, and Tae-hyun stepped out, hands still resting on his concealed weapon. The fog wrapped around them like a living thing, muffling the distant sounds of the city. He could hear her muttering to herself, a stream of technical jargon he didn't understand. "Fuel injection systems shot," she called out. "Probably clogged filter or a faulty pressure regulator." "You been putting cheap gas in this thing?" "I don't put gas in my own car," Tae-hyun said flatly. She snorted. "Yeah, well, somebody's been cutting corners." Metal clinked against metal as she worked. Hand me that rag from your back seat. He didn't move. Nobody gave him orders. Nobody. She glanced up, saw his expression, and rolled her eyes. Jesus. Forget it. I'll use my shirt. For the next 15 minutes, Tae-hyun watched the stranger, this nobody from this forgotten wasteland, dismantle part of his $70,000 engine with the confidence of a surgeon and the speed of someone who'd done this 1,000 times before. She didn't ask questions, didn't seem impressed or intimidated, just worked. When she finally slammed the hood shut and wiped her hands on her pants, she looked at him with something that might have been amusement. Try it now. He slid back into the driver's seat, turned the key, and the Maserati roared to life like it had never died at all. When he looked up, she was already walking away, toolbox swinging at her side, disappearing back into the fog like a ghost who'd never been there at all. Tae-hyun was out of the car before he'd even processed the decision. His footsteps echoed on the cracked asphalt as he followed her retreating figure into the fog. Wait! She stopped but didn't turn around. Just stood there with her toolbox, silhouetted against the dim glow of a distant streetlight that flickered like a dying heartbeat. He reached into his jacket, the same motion that had made grown men wet themselves, and pulled out a leather wallet. His fingers moved with practiced efficiency, extracting a thick envelope he kept for situations that required immediate gratitude. 5,000 in cash. Maybe more. He never counted it. For your work, he said, extending it toward her. Now she turned. Her eyes dropped to the envelope, then lifted to his face. Something flickered across her expression. Not greed, not excitement. Something closer to disappointment. Keep it, she said. Tae-hyun's jaw tightened. In his world, refusing money was either a power play or stupidity. You don't know how much is in here. Don't care how much is in there. She shifted the toolbox to her other hand. I didn't fix your car for money. Then why did you fix it? The question came out harsher than he'd intended, sharp with years of suspicion, of learning that everyone wanted something, that kindness was just another transaction with delayed payment. She was quiet for a moment, and in that silence, Tae-hyun heard the distant sound of a dog barking, the creak of metal shifting in the wind. Ghost Road lived up to its name. My father, she finally said, her voice softer now, used to fix cars in a little garage off 5th Street. People would come from all over because he was good, really good, and he charged fair prices. She looked past Tae-hyun, at something only she could see. But sometimes people would show up with empty pockets and broken down cars, and he'd fix them anyway. I asked him once why he'd work for free, and you know what he told me? Tae-hyun said nothing. His hand still held the envelope between them like an accusation. He said, Brittany, kindness isn't currency. The moment you put a price on it, it becomes something else entirely. Something smaller. She met his eyes again, and there was steel in her gaze. He died 3 years ago, but I'm not going to cheapen what he taught me by taking your money for doing the right thing. She turned and started walking again, her footsteps steady and sure. Who are you? Tae-hyun called after her. She paused, glanced over her shoulder with the ghost of a smile. Nobody important. Then she was gone, swallowed by the fog and the darkness, leaving Tae-hyun standing alone on Ghost Road with an envelope full of useless cash and a strange, unfamiliar feeling twisting in his chest. Something he hadn't felt in so long he'd almost forgotten its name. Curiosity. Brittany didn't realize he'd slipped the card into her toolbox until she was back in her shack, the corrugated metal walls rattling in the wind that swept through the squatter's camp like a restless spirit. She'd been organizing her tools by the light of a battery-powered lantern. Her nightly ritual, the only order she could impose on a life built from chaos, when her fingers brushed against something that didn't belong. Thick cardstock. Smooth. Expensive in a way that felt obscene in a place where people used cardboard as mattresses. She pulled it out and held it up to the lantern's weak glow. The card was black, pure black, with gold embossing that caught the light like liquid metal. No phone number, no address, just a name in elegant script, Tae-hyun Lee. And beneath it, a symbol she recognized immediately. A dragon coiled around a sword, its eyes twin rubies that seemed to watch her even in the flickering darkness. The Iron Dragon. Brittany's hand started to shake. The card slipped from her fingers and fell to the dirt floor of her shack, landing face up, the dragon's ruby eyes staring at nothing. She'd fixed the car of Tae-hyun Lee. The Tae-hyun Lee, the man whose name was whispered in back alleys and dive bars, always with a glance over the shoulder, always with fear coating every syllable. The head of the most ruthless syndicate in the region, a man who'd allegedly orchestrated the Harbor Street massacre 3 years ago, who controlled everything from the docks to the underground gambling dens in the financial district. And she'd told him to keep his money. She'd lectured him about kindness like he was some spoiled rich kid, not a man who could make her disappear with a phone call. Brittany sank onto her makeshift bed, a pallet of flattened cardboard boxes covered with a thin blanket, and stared at the card on the ground. Her mind raced through the interaction, reanalyzing every moment. The way he'd moved, coiled tension in every gesture. The weight of his stare, assessing, calculating. The gun. She'd seen the outline of it beneath his jacket when he'd stepped out of the car. She should throw the card away. Burn it. Forget this ever happened. But something stopped her. Something in his eyes when she'd refused the money. A flash of genuine surprise, maybe even confusion, as if he'd forgotten that people could exist outside the transactional brutality of his world. And there was something else, something she couldn't quite name. A familiarity in the sharp line of his jaw, the way he'd tilted his head when he'd asked, "Who are you?" like she was a puzzle he needed to solve. Brittany picked up the card again, running her thumb across the embossed dragon. The ruby eyes seemed to gleam with their own light, hypnotic and dangerous. She tucked it into the inner pocket of her jacket, right next to the old silver locket she never took off. Tomorrow she'd forget about Tae-hyun Lee and his world of blood and gold. Tomorrow. The card had burned a hole in Brittany's pocket for 3 days before she finally decided to use it. Not because she wanted to, because her landlord, if you could call the man who rented corrugated metal sheets a landlord, had raised her monthly protection fee again, and the auto shop where she picked up side jobs had closed after the owner refused to pay the right people. Desperation had a way of making dangerous decisions feel reasonable. The address on the back of the card led her to a building in the financial district that didn't look like a criminal headquarters. It looked like money, all glass and steel and architectural ambition, the kind of place where men in $1,000 suits decided the fate of entire neighborhoods over cocktails. 2 men stood outside the entrance, both built like concrete walls poured into expensive suits. Their eyes tracked her approach with the kind of cold assessment predators reserved for prey. "Lost?" the taller one asked. His smile didn't reach his eyes. Brittany held up the card. "I'm here to see Tae-hyun Lee." The shorter guard actually laughed, a sharp bark that echoed off the glass facade. "You're here to see the boss? You?" He looked her up and down, taking in her second-hand jacket, her oil-stained work boots, the toolbox in her hand. "What did you do? Find that card in a dumpster? Maybe she's here to fix the toilets," the tall one added. They both thought this was hilarious. Brittany kept her face neutral, but her free hand clenched into a fist. She'd dealt with men like this her whole life. Men who thought poverty was a character flaw, who looked at her and saw nothing worth respecting. "Just call him," she said evenly. "Tell him the mechanic from Ghost Road is here." The mechanic from... The short guard reached for her arm. "Listen, sweetheart. I don't know what kind of scam you're running, but is there a problem?" The voice cut through the mockery like a blade through silk. Both guards went rigid, their faces draining of color. Brittany turned and felt her breath catch. Tae-hyun Lee stood in the building's entrance, dressed in a charcoal suit that probably cost more than she'd earned in her entire life. But it was his eyes that held her, dark, intense, and fixed on her with an expression she couldn't quite read. "Sir, this woman," the tall guard started, "is my guest." Tae-hyun descended the steps with predatory grace, each footfall deliberate and controlled. He stopped in front of Brittany, close enough that she could smell his cologne. Something expensive and woodsy that had no business smelling that good. "You came. You gave me your card," she said, hating how her voice sounded slightly breathless. "I give many people my card. Few are brave enough to use it." His gaze shifted to the guards, and his expression went cold. Touch her again, and you'll lose the hand. Understood. Both men went pale. Yes, sir. Tae-hyun extended his hand toward the entrance. Shall we? The elevator ride to the top floor was silent except for the soft hum of machinery and Brittany's heartbeat thundering in her ears. Tae-hyun stood beside her, hands clasped behind his back, staring at the ascending numbers like they held secrets only he could decipher. When the doors opened, she expected darkness, maybe red lighting and men with guns. Instead, she found floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city, minimalist furniture in shades of gray and black, and a private garage visible through glass walls that showcased a collection of vehicles that belonged in a museum. I have a proposition, Tae-hyun said, walking toward the garage. He pressed his palm against a scanner, and the glass door slid open with a whisper. I own 17 vehicles. Most are investments, but I drive 5 regularly. And I've learned that the people I hire to maintain them are either incompetent or stealing from me. He turned to face her. I need someone I can trust. Brittany set her toolbox down carefully. You don't know me. Why would you trust me? You refused $5,000 for 15 minutes of work. In my experience, that kind of integrity is rarer than any car in this garage. He moved closer and she fought the urge to step back. I'm offering you a job. Maintain my personal fleet. Salary is $15,000 a month, plus a secured apartment in a building I own downtown. Medical coverage. No questions asked about your past. The numbers hit her like a physical blow. 15,000. She currently survived on less than a tenth of that. What's the catch? She asked, because there was always a catch. The catch is that you work exclusively for me. You don't take outside jobs. You don't discuss what you see or hear in this building. And his eyes hardened. You understand that my world is dangerous, and proximity to me makes you a target. Brittany should have walked away, should have thanked him and returned to her shack and found another way to survive. But desperation and opportunity were dancing together, and she'd been tired for so long. I accept. Something flickered across his face. Relief, maybe, or satisfaction. He extended his hand, and she shook it. His grip was firm, his skin warm despite the cold calculation in his eyes. That's when his gaze dropped to her neck, to the thin silver chain barely visible above her collar. His entire body went still. That locket, he said, his voice strange. May I see it? Brittany's hand instinctively went to it, protective. It was a gift. From someone a long time ago. From who? A friend. A boy I knew before. She trailed off, suddenly aware of how intensely he was staring. Before everything fell apart, Tae-hyun reached out slowly, carefully, and lifted the locket with one finger. His hand was shaking, barely noticeable but shaking nonetheless. He opened it with a practiced motion that sent ice through her veins. Inside was a faded photo. 2 children, a boy and a girl. You kept it? He whispered, and when he looked up at her, his eyes held something raw and broken. All these years, Brittany, you kept it. The recognition hung between them like a live wire. But before Brittany could speak, before she could ask the 1,000 questions burning in her throat, Tae-hyun's phone buzzed. His expression shuttered closed, the vulnerable moment disappearing behind the mask of the Mafia boss. We'll talk later, he said, his voice once again controlled and distant. Your apartment key is with my assistant on the 40th floor. Start tomorrow. That conversation never came. For 3 weeks, Brittany worked in his private garage, maintained his fleet with meticulous care, and caught only glimpses of him, always surrounded by men in dark suits, always moving with purpose she wasn't privy to. The boy she'd known, the friend who'd vanished when they were 14, remained locked behind bulletproof glass and armed security. But his lieutenants noticed her, and they weren't happy. She heard the whispers in the hallways, felt the hostile stares when she passed. The boss's new pet, probably sleeping her way into his wallet. She's a plant from the Kozlov family. The rumors grew teeth, and Brittany learned to keep her head down and her hands busy. It came to a head on a Wednesday morning when she arrived at the garage to find 6 of Tae-hyun's men waiting for her, led by a scarred man named Gene who served as head of security. "We have concerns," Gene said, his arms crossed over his chest. "About you." Brittany set down her toolbox. Then voiced them. "You appear out of nowhere. The boss gives you access to his personal vehicles, his private spaces. You could be anyone. A spy, an assassin, someone's insurance policy." Gene stepped closer. "So here's what's going to happen. The boss needs his Bentley for a meeting in 2 hours. You're going to inspect it and we're going to watch every single move." She understood immediately. This wasn't about the car. This was about proving herself or being disappeared. "Fine," Brittany said, moving toward the Bentley Continental. She worked with 6 pairs of eyes boring into her back, checking every system with deliberate precision. The engine was perfect. The electronics, flawless. But when she slid underneath to inspect the undercarriage, her blood went cold. Someone had tampered with the brake lines. Not enough to cause immediate failure, but enough that after 20 minutes of driving, maybe 30, the hydraulic fluid would drain and the brakes would die. On the highway at speed, it would be fatal. This wasn't a test. This was an execution disguised as one. Brittany rolled out from under the car and looked directly at Gene. "Who rigged this vehicle?" His expression didn't change, but something flickered in his eyes. Surprise, maybe, or respect. "What are you talking about?" She stood, grabbed a flashlight, and pointed. "The brake lines have been scored. Clean cuts, deliberate. Someone wants Tae-hyun dead, and they're using me as the scapegoat." She met Jin's gaze without flinching. "So either help me fix this, or explain to your boss why his mechanic discovered an assassination attempt that his head of security missed." The brake line discovery changed everything. Jin's investigation uncovered a network of betrayal that ran deeper than anyone had suspected. 3 lieutenants bought by the Kosloff family, 2 guards on the payroll of a rival syndicate, all coordinating to destabilize Tae-hyun's empire from within. The purge was swift and brutal. Brittany heard the gunshots echoing through the building at 3 in the morning, saw the black body bags being loaded into unmarked vans at dawn. Tae-hyun's face throughout it all remained carved from stone, but she saw the way his hand shook when he poured his whiskey, the haunted look in his eyes when he thought no one was watching. She wanted to comfort him, to finally have the conversation about who they'd been and who they'd become. But the timing was never right, and the distance between mechanic and mafia boss felt wider than the years that separated the children they'd once been. Then she found the file on her workbench. No note, no explanation, just a manila folder containing surveillance photos of her shack, her daily route to the building, the small grocery store where she bought her food, and written in red ink across the top, "Leverage." Her hands trembled as she flipped through the pages. Intelligence reports, threat assessments, a proposal from the Kosloff family offering $2 million for her kidnapping. They'd identified her as Tae-hyun's weakness, the crack in his armor, the soft spot that could be exploited. She'd saved his life once by finding the rigged brake lines. Now her very existence was putting him in danger. Brittany sat in the empty garage for an hour, staring at her reflection in the polished hood of his Maserati, the same car she'd fixed on Ghost Road, the night that had changed everything. She thought about her father's words about kindness, about the boy Tae-hyun had been before the world turned him into something sharp and dangerous. The decision crystallized like ice in her chest. She found paper in the office, her hand steady as she wrote. "Some acts of kindness mean knowing when to leave. You taught me that people in your world become targets. I won't be the reason you fall. Thank you for everything, for remembering, for keeping me safe. But I can't be your weakness. B." She left the note on his desk, weighed down by the locket she'd worn for 12 years. The photo of 2 smiling children stared up at the ceiling, frozen in a moment before everything broke. Brittany grabbed her toolbox and walked out of the building at midnight, past the confused guards, into the city that had shaped her into something resilient and hard. She caught a bus to the industrial district, to the sprawling maze of shipping containers near the harbor where people could disappear and never be found. If the Kosloff family wanted her, let them search the docks. Let them waste their resources hunting shadows. As long as they were focused on her, they wouldn't see Tae-hyun coming. She'd learned from the best, after all. Brittany lasted 4 days in the shipping container labyrinth before they found her. She'd been careful, moving at night, sleeping in abandoned containers, using cash she'd saved to buy food from vendors who didn't ask questions. But the Kozlov family had eyes everywhere, and desperation made people talkative. They came at dusk. 5 men with guns and cold smiles, led by a blond man in an expensive coat who introduced himself as Victor. They zip-tied her hands, shoved her into a black SUV, and drove her to a warehouse on the waterfront where the sound of the ocean could swallow screams. "You're very valuable," Victor said, circling her like a shark. Rain hammered against the corrugated metal roof, turning the world outside into gray static. Tae-hyun Lee's little pet mechanic. His weakness. We've been watching him unravel since you left. He crouched in front of her chair, his breath smelling of cigarettes and expensive cologne. He's been tearing the city apart looking for you. Very undisciplined. Very exploitable. Brittany said nothing. Her wrists burned from the zip ties. Her ribs ached from where one of the men had kicked her, but she kept her face neutral. She wouldn't give them the satisfaction. "We're going to make him an offer," Victor continued. "His empire for your life. And when he refuses, because men like him always choose power, we'll send him pieces of you until he learns that everything he touches turns to." The warehouse door exploded inward. Not opened. Exploded. The metal shrieked and buckled, and through the rain and smoke, a figure emerged that looked more demon than man. Tae-hyun Lee, soaked to the bone, blood on his knuckles and murder in his eyes. "Get away from her," he said, his voice deadly quiet. Victor stood, reaching for his gun, but Tae-hyun moved like violence incarnate. 3 seconds. That's all it took. Victor's arms snapped with a wet crack, his gun clattered to the floor, and Tae-hyun's forearm pressed against his throat. "You think she's my weakness?" Tae-hyun's voice was barely human. "She's the only thing that makes me remember I was ever anything other than this." He threw Victor aside like garbage and turned to the other men, who were raising their weapons with shaking hands. "I will burn your families. I will erase your names. I will make you wish you'd never been born. Or—" He pulled his own gun, aimed it at the ground. "You can run." They ran. Tae-hyun crossed to Brittany in 3 strides, his hands surprisingly gentle as he cut through her zip ties. Rain poured through the broken door, turning the warehouse floor into a shallow lake. "You left," he said, and his voice cracked on the words. "You left me again. I was protecting you. I don't want protection." The words exploded out of him. "I want you. I've wanted you since we were children. I built this empire looking for you, and when I finally found you, you ran because you thought I'd choose power over." He cupped her face in his hands, and she saw tears mixing with rain. "I would lose everything. The syndicate, the money, all of it. I would rather have nothing with you than everything without you." The dismantling of the Iron Dragon Syndicate took 8 months and nearly cost Tae-hyun his life 3 times. He liquidated the underground operations first, selling territories to rivals who'd spent years trying to take them by force. The gambling dens, the protection rackets, the smuggling routes, all of it went to the highest bidder. Some of his men understood. Most didn't. 2 attempted coups had to be handled with the kind of brutal efficiency that reminded everyone why Tae-hyun had built an empire in the first place. But through it all, Brittany stayed. Not in the shadows this time, but beside him, her hand in his during negotiations, her voice the calm center when his rage threatened to consume everything. "You're not that boy anymore," she told him one night after a meeting had ended with gunfire. "But you're not just the monster either. You're something in between, and that's enough." He invested the money, millions upon millions earned through blood and fear, into something clean. A technology firm specializing in automotive innovation and sustainable engineering. It felt appropriate somehow. The girl who'd fixed his car on Ghost Road would help him build something that actually moved people forward instead of dragging them down. They called it Legacy Solutions. The wedding happened on a Saturday in spring, small and private, in a garden far from the city where Tae-hyun had built his empire of shadows. No guns, no guards, Just 40 people who'd survived the transition and believed in second chances. Brittany wore a simple white dress and the silver locket, returned to her the night of the warehouse, placed around her neck by hands that had learned gentleness was a choice, not a weakness. Taehyun wore a gray suit and an expression of wonder, as if he couldn't quite believe she was real, that this moment was real, that they'd both survived long enough to stand here together. "I promised myself when I was 14 that I'd find you," he said during his vows, his voice rough with emotion. "I just didn't know the person I'd have to become to keep searching, or that you'd be the one to remind me who I used to be. I promised myself I'd never love anyone," Brittany replied, tears streaming down her face, "because everyone I loved disappeared. But you came back. Even when you were lost, you came back." 6 months later, Brittany walked across the stage in a cap and gown, accepting her engineering degree, paid for by the man who'd once been a Mafia boss and was now her husband and business partner. The auditorium erupted in applause. Taehyun stood and cheered louder than anyone, his past visible in the tattoos on his hands but his future sitting in the front row, watching his wife become everything she'd always been capable of being. That afternoon, they broke ground on the Legacy Institute, a technical school for orphans and street kids, offering free training in mechanical engineering, coding, and skilled trades. "Your father was right," Taehyun said, watching the excavators move earth. "Kindness isn't currency." Brittany squeezed his hand. "No, something better. It's legacy."